Between stimulus and response lies a gap. For most people, this gap measures in milliseconds, so brief that stimulus and response feel like a single event. Someone criticizes your work, and before you've consciously processed their words, your jaw tightens, your voice rises, defensiveness already forming sentences in your throat. This is reaction, the ancestral machinery of survival operating at speeds that bypass deliberation entirely. The brain's reactive pathways evolved for a world where threats were immediate and physical. The amygdala, that almond-shaped cluster of neurons buried in the temporal lobe, serves as the brain's alarm system. When it detects potential danger, a raised voice, a dismissive gesture, a challenge to your identity, it triggers a cascade of responses before the information reaches your prefrontal cortex, the seat of reasoned thought. Stress hormones flood your system. Your heart rate spikes. Blood flows away from digestive organs toward major muscle groups. You are, in the span of 200 milliseconds, prepared to fight or flee a threat that may not exist outside your interpretation. This speed once saved lives. The ancestor who paused to contemplate whether that rustling in the grass was wind or predator became lunch. Better to react first, analyze later. Natural selection carved reactive pathways deep into our neural architecture, and we inherited them wholesale, along with the unfortunate fact that our amygdala cannot distinguish between a charging tiger and a passive-aggressive email from a colleague. The problem is that most modern threats are not predators. They are ambiguous social situations, challenges to our self-image, frustrations with circumstances beyond our control. Yet we bring Paleolithic hardware to these contemporary problems. We react to a teenager's eye roll as if defending territory, to traffic delays as if fleeing danger, to intellectual disagreement as if under physical attack. The body mobilizes resources for emergencies that don't require them, leaving us physiologically prepared for action that would be socially catastrophic to take. Neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux mapped two pathways by which sensory information reaches the amygdala. The low road is direct, fast, and crude, a quick and dirty assessment that sacrifices accuracy for speed. The high road routes through the cortex, allowing for nuanced interpretation but taking roughly twice as long. In the crucial first moments of any charged situation, the low road wins. You feel the emotional reaction before you understand what you're reacting to. This creates a peculiar feature of human experience: we often don't know why we feel what we feel. The interpretation comes after the emotional response, and often serves merely to justify it. You feel a flash of anger when your partner forgets to call, and your mind immediately supplies reasons why this is unacceptable, cataloging previous failures, constructing narratives of disrespect. But the anger came first. The reasons are post hoc rationalization, the conscious mind trying to make sense of what the unconscious mind already decided. Psychologist Daniel Kahneman describes this as the interaction between System 1 and System 2 thinking. System 1 operates automatically, intuitively, rapidly. It's the part of you that reacts. System 2 is slower, more deliberate, more logical. It's the part that responds. The problem is that System 1 runs the show most of the time, with System 2 serving largely as a press secretary, explaining decisions already made rather than making them. The physiological cost of chronic reactivity is measurable. Each reaction triggers a stress response, cortisol and adrenaline flooding your system, blood pressure spiking, immune function temporarily suppressed. In moments of genuine danger, this is adaptive. But when you're reacting dozens of times daily to non-threatening stimuli, to traffic, to news headlines, to perceived slights, you're essentially poisoning yourself with your own stress hormones. The body never fully returns to baseline. You exist in a state of chronic low-level activation, like an engine that never fully powers down. This explains why reactive people are exhausting to be around. They're not choosing to be volatile, they're caught in a loop where external events directly trigger internal states, with no mediating layer of choice. They are, in a real sense, not in control of themselves. Their emotional life is a pinball machine, and every external event is a flipper sending them careening in a new direction. The art of not reacting, then, is not about suppressing emotion or becoming indifferent. It's about reclaiming that gap between stimulus and response, expanding it from milliseconds to seconds, creating space for System 2 to evaluate what System 1 has already decided. It's about recognizing that the first emotional response is information, not instruction. You can feel anger without acting on it, fear without fleeing from it, attraction without pursuing it. This requires understanding a counterintuitive truth: you are not your reactions. The anger you feel when criticized is not you feeling angry. It's a neurological event, a cascade of evolved responses to perceived threat. The you that can observe this reaction, note its intensity, wonder about its cause, that observer is something different. And in that observation lies the possibility of choice. The recognition that reaction enslaves us while response liberates us is not new. It appears, in various formulations, across virtually every serious philosophical and spiritual tradition humans have developed. What differs is the explanation for why we react, and the methods proposed for transcending reactivity. The Stoics, writing in Greece and Rome 2 millennia ago, built an entire philosophy around this insight. Marcus Aurelius, ruling an empire from his military tent, wrote to himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The Stoic project was essentially about repositioning the locus of control. External events, what others say, what happens to your possessions, whether you're praised or blamed, these lie outside your control and are therefore indifferent. What remains within your control is your judgment about these events and your response to them. Epictetus, born a slave, took this further. He argued that people are disturbed not by things themselves but by their views about things. Death is not terrible; if it were, it would have appeared so to Socrates. What's terrible is the judgment that death is terrible. This sounds like semantic hair-splitting until you examine it closely. Between the event, someone insults you, and your suffering lies your interpretation: this insult diminishes my worth. Remove the interpretation, and the event loses its power to disturb you. The Stoic method was prosoche, constant attention to your judgments, catching them before they harden into reactions. When something appears good or bad, pause and examine whether it truly is or whether you've merely labeled it so out of habit. This practice required brutal honesty. Most of what we react to, the Stoics recognized, threatens not our actual well-being but our self-image, our desire to be seen a certain way, our attachment to outcomes we cannot control. Across the Mediterranean and eastward, Buddhist philosophy arrived at similar conclusions through different reasoning. The second noble truth identifies tanha, craving or clinging, as the root of suffering. We react because we want reality to be different than it is. We want respect instead of criticism, convenience instead of delay, certainty instead of ambiguity. Each reaction is essentially an argument with reality, an insistence that things should be other than they are. Reality wins these arguments every time, but we keep fighting. The Buddhist concept of equanimity, upekkha, describes a mind that remains balanced in the face of both pleasant and unpleasant experiences. This isn't indifference or detachment in the sense of not caring. It's a recognition that everything that arises also passes, and that grasping at pleasant experiences or pushing away unpleasant ones only amplifies suffering. The reactive mind says this shouldn't be happening. The equanimous mind says this is happening, and it too shall pass. Buddhist practice emphasizes mindfulness, bear attention to present experience without judgment. Notice the sensation of anger arising in the body. Observe the thoughts that accompany it. Watch the urge to speak or act. Simply observe, without identifying with these phenomena or being compelled by them. In this observation, a gap opens. The anger is still present, but you are not the anger. You're the awareness within which anger appears. The Bhagavad Gita presents Krishna's teaching to Arjuna on the battlefield: perform your duty without attachment to outcomes. Act, but don't react to the fruits of action. This is karma yoga, the yoga of action performed without the agitation of desire or aversion. What enslaves us is not action itself but the emotional entanglement with results, the reactivity that comes from needing things to turn out a particular way. In the Western philosophical tradition, Spinoza described freedom as understanding necessity. We react because we imagine we are autonomous agents whose desires should shape reality. We suffer when reality doesn't comply. But if we understand that everything follows necessarily from prior causes, that the person who insulted you was themselves shaped by causes beyond their control, operating from their own pain or limitation, the personal sting vanishes. The insult becomes like weather, not pleasant, but not personal either. Schopenhauer, drawing on Buddhist and Hindu philosophy, saw representation, how we interpret the world, as the source of suffering. The world as it exists in itself is one thing, the world as filtered through our wants, fears, and conceptual frameworks is another. We react to our representations, not to reality itself. A stock market crash is devastating if you represent your worth through your portfolio, neutral if you don't. The event is the same, the representation differs. Nietzsche, despite his rejection of Buddhist and Christian slave morality, arrived at his own version of non-reactivity, a more farty love of fate. The reactive person wishes the past were different, resents the present, and anxiously controls the future. The noble person says yes to all of it, not in passive resignation but in active affirmation. What happened needed to happen for you to be who you are. To wish any part different is to wish yourself different, to react against your own existence. The existentialists, particularly Frankl, discovered in concentration camps what ancient philosophers argued in comfort: between stimulus and response lies freedom. You cannot always choose your circumstances, but you can always choose your response. This is not merely philosophical abstraction. Frankl watched fellow prisoners react to deprivation with despair or respond to it by finding meaning. The stimulus, brutal imprisonment, was identical. The response determined whether one retained their humanity or lost it. What unites these diverse traditions is recognition of a basic structure: there is what happens, there is your interpretation of what happens, and there is your response to your interpretation. Most people collapse these three into one seamless experience of reactivity. Philosophical and spiritual practice is about unbundling them, creating space between each stage, so that the third element, response, becomes genuinely chosen rather than mechanically triggered. The methods differ. Stoics interrogate judgments. Buddhists observe sensations. Taoists cultivate spontaneous alignment. But all aim at the same target: liberation from the tyranny of automatic reaction, the recovery of the gap where freedom lives. They recognize that humans are the only creatures cursed and blessed with this possibility: cursed because our reactions often exceed what situations require, blessed because we can transcend our reactions entirely. Human relationships function as complex systems of action and reaction, each person's behavior triggering responses in others, creating feedback loops that either stabilize into functional patterns or spiral into dysfunction. The difference between a reactive and responsive person is not merely internal, it reshapes every relationship they inhabit. Consider a simple interaction: your partner comes home irritable after a difficult day and speaks to you curtly. The reactive response is immediate interpretation and counter-reaction. You take the curtness personally, feel hurt or annoyed, and respond with your own curtness or withdrawal. Your partner, already stressed, now feels unsupported or attacked, escalating their irritability. Within minutes, two people who care about each other are locked in a conflict that neither wanted and that has nothing to do with their actual relationship. They're reacting to reactions, layers removed from any original cause. The responsive approach interrupts this cascade. You notice the curtness but don't immediately interpret it as being about you. You pause, consider context: they just walked in, they look stressed, this is unusual behavior for them. You respond to the actual situation rather than your triggered interpretation: rough day. This creates space for them to explain rather than defend, to connect rather than escalate. The entire trajectory of the evening shifts because one person chose response over reaction. This pattern scales. Reactive people create relational volatility. Those around them learn to walk on eggshells, carefully managing their own behavior to avoid triggering reactions. This is exhausting and ultimately breeds resentment. The reactive person becomes the emotional weather system everyone else must accommodate, their moods dictating the climate of shared spaces. They may not intend this tyranny, they're simply expressing what they feel, but the effect is the same. Psychologist John Gottman's research on marital stability identified what he calls the four horsemen of relationship apocalypse: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. Notice that 3 of these are pure reactivity. Defensiveness is reactive self-protection. Contempt is a reaction to feeling superior or wronged. Stonewalling is a reaction to feeling overwhelmed. Couples headed for divorce don't necessarily have more problems than stable couples, they react to problems differently. The responsive person creates relational stability. When they're criticized, they don't immediately defend or counterattack. They listen, consider whether the criticism contains truth, respond proportionally. This doesn't mean accepting abuse or surrendering boundaries, it means not allowing someone else's dysregulation to dysregulate you. You can be firm without being reactive, clear without being cruel. This creates what therapists call secure attachment. Children develop secure attachment when caregivers respond consistently to their needs rather than reacting based on their own moods. The child learns that the world is predictable, that their feelings matter, that they can trust relationships. Reactive parenting, where the parent's response depends more on their own emotional state than the child's actual behavior, creates anxious or avoidant attachment. The child learns that relationships are unpredictable, that they must manage others' emotions, that connection isn't safe. These patterns replicate in adult relationships. The person with reactive parents often becomes reactive themselves, having never learned the skill of emotional self-regulation. Or they become hypervigilant, constantly monitoring others for signs of potential reaction, their own emotional life subordinated to keeping others calm. Both outcomes represent unfreedom, being controlled by others' reactivity or by fear of it. In professional contexts, reactivity destroys credibility. The colleague who flies off the handle in meetings, who takes feedback as personal attack, who responds to setbacks with visible panic, they may be technically competent, but they're rarely trusted with increasing responsibility. Leadership requires steadiness under pressure, the ability to absorb others' anxiety without becoming anxious yourself. This is not about suppressing emotion but about not allowing emotion to immediately become action. The responsive professional creates what leadership theorist Ronald Heffetz calls holding environment, a space where difficult problems can be confronted without the conversation collapsing into reactivity. When a project fails, the reactive leader looks for someone to blame or defensively justifies the failure. The responsive leader asks what happened, what can be learned, what needs to change. One reaction closes down thinking, the other opens it up. There's a particular social cost to reactivity that's rarely discussed: it makes you boring. The reactive person is predictable, you know exactly how they'll respond to any given stimulus. Criticize them, and they'll defend. Disagree with them, and they'll argue. Challenge them, and they'll dismiss. Their reactions are so reliable that they cease to be interesting. You stop sharing certain thoughts with them because you already know the reaction you'll receive. The responsive person, by contrast, retains the capacity for surprise. You don't know how they'll respond because their responses aren't automatic, they emerge from actual consideration of what you've said. This makes conversation with them generative rather than merely transactional. You can think together rather than merely exchange preformed positions. Reactivity also distorts perception. When you're reactive, you view others primarily through the lens of how they make you feel. The person who criticized you becomes the enemy. The person who praised you becomes an ally. You've reduced complex humans to their utility or threat to your emotional equilibrium. This is a form of dehumanization, treating others as objects that either please or displease rather than as subjects with their own complex internal lives. Response allows for nuance. The person who criticized you may have valid points mixed with invalid ones, delivered poorly but intended helpfully. The person who praised you may have ulterior motives or poor judgment. You can hold multiple truths simultaneously rather than collapsing everything into simple categories of good and bad based on your immediate emotional reaction. In group dynamics, a single reactive person can poison collective intelligence. Meetings become exercises in managing that person's reactions rather than solving problems. Ideas go unexpressed because someone anticipates the reaction they'll provoke. The group's thinking contracts to fit within the reactive person's comfort zone. This is why toxic cultures often center around reactive leaders. Everyone else's bandwidth gets consumed managing the leader's emotional volatility. Conversely, a responsive person raises the ceiling for everyone. When someone consistently responds rather than reacts, when they can hear criticism without becoming defensive, tolerate uncertainty without panicking, encounter disagreement without personalizing it, they give permission for others to do the same. Psychological safety, the condition necessary for learning and innovation, is essentially collective non-reactivity, the shared confidence that honest expression won't trigger destructive reactions. The deepest relational cost of reactivity is loneliness. When you're reactive, people can't truly know you because they're always encountering your defenses, your projections, your automated responses rather than your actual self. Your reactions are a wall between you and genuine connection. People may be close to you physically or organizationally, but they're relating to your reactivity, not to you. Response, paradoxically, allows for both intimacy and independence. You can be close to someone without needing them to regulate your emotional state. You can disagree without catastrophizing the relationship. You can be disappointed without blaming. You can be yourself because you're not constantly reacting to maintain some fragile self-image. This is what mature love looks like, not the passionate reactivity of early romance, but the steady responsiveness of two people who've learned to stay themselves in the presence of another. Understanding why non-reactivity matters accomplishes nothing without practical methods for developing it. This is the gap where most philosophy fails, beautiful theory with no bridge to embodied practice. The art of not reacting is precisely that, an art, requiring cultivation, repetition, and specific techniques that rewire habitual patterns. The foundational practice is the pause. Before any technique can be applied, you must create the space to apply it. This means training yourself to notice the moment of reaction, the physical sensation of anger rising, the mental contraction when criticized, the impulse to speak or act, and inserting a delay between that impulse and action. Start with 3 seconds. When you feel the urge to react, count to 3 before responding. This sounds trivial. It is not. In those 3 seconds, several things happen. The initial neurochemical surge begins to subside. The prefrontal cortex comes online. You become aware that you're having a reaction rather than being the reaction. This small gap is where all freedom lives. Viktor Frankl was right, between stimulus and response is a space, and in that space is your power. The pause can be formalized through simple behavioral commitments. Never send an angry email immediately, draft it, then wait an hour. When someone says something that triggers you, don't respond until you've taken 3 slow breaths. In heated conversations, make a rule: before responding to what someone said, summarize their position to their satisfaction. This forces you to actually listen rather than preparing your reaction while they speak. The second essential practice is somatic awareness, learning to recognize reactions in your body before they become thoughts or actions. Reactivity has a physical signature: jaw clenching, chest tightening, face flushing, breath becoming shallow. These bodily states precede and often trigger the cognitive reaction. If you can catch the physical reaction early, you can intervene before it cascades into action. This requires developing interoception, awareness of internal bodily states. Regular practice is necessary. Sit quietly and scan your body. Notice tension, temperature, sensation. Throughout the day, periodically check in: where am I holding tension right now? How am I breathing? What does my face feel like? This seems mechanical until it becomes automatic, and then you gain an early warning system for reactivity. When you notice the physical signature of reaction, the tightness, the heat, the acceleration, don't try to suppress it. That creates secondary reactivity, reacting to your reaction. Instead, deliberately relax the body. Unclench the jaw. Drop the shoulders. Slow the breath. The mind and body are not separate systems, they're deeply coupled. You cannot remain in full reactive mode while breathing slowly and deeply. The physiology doesn't support it. Breath work deserves specific attention. The breath is the only autonomic function you can consciously control, making it a bridge between automatic and deliberate processes. Box breathing: inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4, activates the parasympathetic nervous system, physically counteracting the stress response. This is not mysticism, it's applied neuroscience. When reactive, breathe deliberately. The reaction will diminish. The third practice is cognitive reframing, learning to question and revise the interpretations that trigger reactions. This is the Stoic discipline of testing judgments. When you feel reactive, identify the thought driving the reaction. Usually it follows a pattern: this shouldn't be happening. They shouldn't have done that. This is terrible. I can't handle this. Question these thoughts systematically. Says who? Based on what? Is it actually true, or just uncomfortable? If this is terrible, what words remain for actual catastrophes? Could there be alternative interpretations? A harsh email might reflect the sender's stress rather than their opinion of you. A project failure might be an opportunity for learning rather than a personal indictment. The situation hasn't changed, only your story about it. Byron Katie's The Work formalizes this process into 4 questions. Is it true? Can you absolutely know it's true? How do you react when you believe that thought? Who would you be without that thought? Then you turn the thought around and find examples where the opposite might be equally or more true. This systematic interrogation of reactive thoughts reveals how much of your suffering comes from interpretation rather than events. The fourth practice is exposure, deliberately placing yourself in situations that trigger mild reactivity, then practicing non-reaction. If you're reactive to criticism, ask trusted friends for honest feedback and practice receiving it without defending. If you're reactive to waiting, deliberately choose the slow line at the grocery store and practice patience. If you're reactive to uncertainty, sit with unresolved questions rather than rushing to conclusions. This is the psychological equivalent of strength training. You're building the muscle of non-reactivity by exercising it against progressive resistance. Start small. You wouldn't begin weightlifting with your maximum load. Practice not reacting to minor irritations before attempting non-reactivity in major crises. Each successful instance of not reacting strengthens the neural pathways of response over reaction. Meditation deserves mention not as mysticism but as mental training. Sitting meditation is fundamentally practice in not reacting. Thoughts arise, including judgments that you're doing it wrong, that you're bored, that you should stop, and you practice not following them, not engaging, just returning attention to breath or sensation. This is precisely the skill you need in daily life, noticing mental activity without being compelled by it. You don't need hours of meditation. 10 minutes daily of simply watching thoughts without engaging them will, over months, rewire your default relationship to mental activity. You'll begin to experience thoughts as events in consciousness rather than as commands to obey. The thought "I should tell them off" becomes just a thought you're having rather than an action you must take. The fifth practice is preemptive framing, deciding in advance how you'll respond to predictable triggers. You know certain situations, certain people, certain topics make you reactive. Before entering those situations, explicitly decide how you want to respond. Visualize maintaining composure. Identify your early warning signs. Choose a specific tool you'll deploy. Athletes use this technique constantly, visualizing performance under pressure, mentally rehearsing responses to adversity. You can do the same for reactivity. Before the difficult conversation with your mother, before the meeting with your antagonistic colleague, spend 2 minutes visualizing yourself remaining responsive rather than reactive. This pre-programs the response, making it more accessible under stress. The sixth practice is values clarification. Much reactivity stems from unclear priorities. You react because in the moment, you've forgotten what actually matters. Spend time identifying your core values, not what you think you should value, but what you actually value. Then, when reactive, ask, is this reaction aligned with my values? If I act on this impulse, will I be proud of it tomorrow? What response would my best self choose? This creates distance from the reaction. You're not suppressing it through sheer willpower, you're choosing something you care about more. You care about being the kind of person who stays composed under criticism more than you care about defending yourself in this particular moment. The reaction loses power because you've clarified that it doesn't serve what you actually value. The seventh practice is self-compassion, recognizing that reactivity is human and that you will sometimes fail at non-reactivity. When you do react, and you will, don't pile secondary reactivity on top through harsh self-judgment. Notice what happened, understand the trigger, commit to doing better, and move on. Beating yourself up for being reactive is itself a reaction to your own imperfection. Finally, accountability structures help. Tell someone you trust about your practice. Ask them to gently point out when you're being reactive. This external mirror helps you see patterns you might rationalize or overlook. And knowing someone is watching creates positive pressure to practice what you've committed to. None of these techniques work instantly. The brain's reactive pathways were carved over millennia of evolution and decades of personal habit. You're not deleting them, you're building alternative pathways that, with repetition, become stronger and more accessible. Neuroscientists call this self-directed neuroplasticity. You are literally rewiring your brain through practice. Expect to fail frequently at first. Each failure is information. This trigger is stronger than your current capacity for non-reactivity. You need more practice, or a different technique, or to catch the reaction earlier. The goal is not perfection but progressive improvement, reacting less often, less intensely, recovering more quickly. The paradox is that trying too hard to not react can itself become a form of reactivity, suppressing, controlling, fighting with yourself. The art is gentle, persistent, patient effort. You're not wrestling your reactions into submission. You're gradually expanding the space between impulse and action, building the capacity to choose response over reaction. This is mastery of self, which is the only mastery that matters. To master the art of not reacting, you must understand its boundaries. Like any powerful tool, non-reactivity can be misapplied, becoming a defense mechanism rather than a liberation, a means of avoidance rather than engagement. The goal is not to become emotionally flatlined, unresponsive to genuine injustice, or so detached that you lose your humanity. The goal is discernment, knowing when non-reactivity serves you and when it betrays you. The first critical distinction is between non-reactivity and suppression. Suppression is pushing down emotion, pretending it doesn't exist, maintaining a facade of calm while internally seething. This is not the art of not reacting, it's the art of lying to yourself and others. Suppressed emotions don't disappear, they compress, gaining pressure, eventually exploding or leaking out in passive-aggressive behavior, physical illness, or sudden disproportionate reactions to minor triggers. True non-reactivity involves full acknowledgement of emotion without being compelled by it. You feel the anger completely, in your body, in your thoughts, but you don't immediately act on it. You create space around it. Suppression says, I shouldn't feel this. Non-reactivity says, I feel this, and I'm choosing how to respond to it. The emotion is honored but not obeyed. The second distinction is between non-reactivity and emotional numbing. Some people, particularly those with trauma histories, develop an inability to feel at all. They've disconnected from their emotional life as a survival mechanism. This looks like non-reactivity, they don't visibly react to things, but it's actually a profound unfreedom. They're not choosing their responses, they've simply severed the connection between experience and emotion. Healthy non-reactivity preserves emotional sensitivity. You still feel joy, sorrow, anger, fear, perhaps even more intensely because you're not constantly buffeted by reactive noise. But you hold these feelings with awareness rather than being overwhelmed by them. The traumatized person who feels nothing and the reactive person who feels everything chaotically are both imprisoned. The responsive person feels deeply but chooses wisely. The third distinction, and perhaps the most important, is recognizing when reaction is appropriate. Not all immediate, forceful responses are reactivity in the negative sense. There are moments when swift, decisive action is necessary, when someone's safety is threatened, when a boundary is being violated, when injustice demands confrontation. The difference is consciousness. Reactivity is unconscious, automatic, compulsive. A conscious reaction, what we might better call an immediate response, comes from clarity about values and circumstances. You're not reacting from wounded ego or fear, you're responding with appropriate force to a situation that requires it. The abused partner who finally says no more and leaves isn't being reactive, they're making a response that's been thoughtfully considered even if it appears sudden to observers. Consider righteous anger, the anger that arises in the face of genuine injustice. This is different from reactive anger triggered by ego threat. Martin Luther King Jr. demonstrated this distinction. His speeches burned with moral indignation at racial injustice, yet his actions were carefully calculated, strategic, responsive rather than reactive. He felt the anger fully but channeled it through disciplined non-violent resistance rather than letting it dictate impulsive action. The test is whether the response serves your values and the situation, or merely vents your discomfort. Reactive anger wants to hurt back, to dominate, to win. Responsive anger wants to correct injustice, to protect, to establish appropriate boundaries. One is about you, the other is about the situation. One seeks revenge, the other seeks resolution. There's also the problem of non-reactivity as spiritual bypass, using equanimity as an excuse to avoid difficult emotions or necessary conflicts. The person who responds to their partner's legitimate complaint with "I'm practicing non-attachment" isn't being enlightened, they're being avoidant. Non-reactivity should increase your capacity for difficult conversations, not provide an excuse to dodge them. Similarly, non-reactivity can become a form of privilege. If you're not directly threatened by injustice, it's easy to counsel patience and measured response. For those facing immediate harm, discrimination, abuse, exploitation, demanding non-reactivity can be a way of silencing justified protest. "Don't be so reactive" sometimes means "don't disturb my comfort with your entirely reasonable anger at how you're being treated." The philosopher's calm non-reactivity in the face of abstract injustice looks very different from the activist's urgent, forceful response to injustice they're personally experiencing. Both might be appropriate to their circumstances. The key is whether the response is proportional to actual conditions or whether it's magnified by unconscious fears and ego investments. Non-reactivity also has social costs. In some contexts, being visibly reactive is how you demonstrate that you care. The parent who doesn't react with visible alarm when their child is endangered might be demonstrating admirable calm, or they might be demonstrating dangerous indifference. The employee who doesn't react when their work is plagiarized might be practicing equanimity, or they might be allowing exploitation. Relationships require some degree of emotional responsiveness. The partner who practices such perfect non-reactivity that they never seem affected by anything, never hurt, never excited, never vulnerable, isn't offering stability, they're offering a wall. Intimacy requires the willingness to be moved by another person, to let them matter enough that their actions affect you. This points to a deeper paradox. Complete non-reactivity would mean complete invulnerability, which would mean not caring about anything enough for it to disturb you. But a life where nothing disturbs you is a life without love, without passion, without stakes. The Stoic ideal of apatheia, freedom from passion, taken to its logical conclusion produces a sage who is free from suffering only because they've made themselves free from caring. Most of us don't want that. We want to care deeply about people and causes and work, which means we're vulnerable to being disturbed when those things are threatened. The art, then, is selective vulnerability, caring deeply but not letting that caring trigger disproportionate, destructive reactions. You want to be moved, but not controlled. There's also the practical reality that some reactive intensity is persuasive. The leader who calmly announces layoffs may be demonstrating admirable composure, but they may also be demonstrating disturbing detachment. Sometimes people need to see that you're affected, that you understand the gravity of the situation, that you haven't become so skilled at non-reactivity that you've lost touch with normal human emotion. The wisdom is calibration. In a genuine emergency, immediate forceful action is appropriate. In an ambiguous social situation, measured response is appropriate. In the face of chronic injustice, sustained strategic pressure is appropriate. The problem is that our reactive machinery treats everything like an emergency, collapsing all distinctions into simple fight or flight. Cultivating non-reactivity gives you the capacity to distinguish between these situations rather than responding uniformly. You gain range. You can be fierce when fierceness serves, gentle when gentleness serves, patient when patience serves. You're no longer limited to one mode, reactive, but can access the full spectrum of human response. The ultimate paradox is that the art of not reacting might itself become something you're attached to, a new identity you defend reactively. The person who prides themselves on never being reactive is one criticism of their equanimity away from reactive defensiveness. True non-reactivity includes non-reactivity about non-reactivity. You don't react when you fail at it, don't take pride when you succeed at it, don't judge others for being more reactive than you. This points toward the final realization: non-reactivity is not the goal. It's a tool in service of something larger, living according to your values, maintaining relationships that matter, acting effectively in the world, reducing unnecessary suffering. When non-reactivity serves these ends, employ it. When it doesn't, set it aside. The master of non-reactivity is not the person who never reacts. It's the person who can react when appropriate, respond when appropriate, and distinguish between the two. They've developed such familiarity with their reactive patterns that they can choose to engage or disengage them consciously. They are not enslaved to reactivity, but neither are they rigidly committed to non-reactivity. What they've gained is freedom, not freedom from emotion, but freedom within emotion. Not freedom from being affected by life, but freedom in how they're affected. They can be fully human, passionate, vulnerable, caring, without being controlled by the automatic machinery that turns stimulus into compulsive response. This is the art, not to stop feeling, but to stop being run by what you feel. Not to become invulnerable, but to remain capable of choice even when vulnerable. Not to transcend your humanity, but to inhabit it more fully by reclaiming the gap between what happens and what you do about it. In that gap lives everything that makes us more than sophisticated stimulus response machines. Dignity, wisdom, compassion, the ability to break cycles of harm rather than perpetuate them. The capacity to be surprised by ourselves, to grow, to choose who we become rather than merely express who we've been. The art of not reacting is ultimately the art of being human in the fullest sense, responsive rather than automatic, conscious rather than mechanical, free rather than determined. It doesn't require perfection. It requires only the willingness to practice, to fail, to learn, and to gradually expand the space where you are most yourself, awake, aware, and able to choose.